Armored Core 3. The sixth game within the series and one of the unique games of its time on the PlayStation 2 back then, for its sheer amount of customization and well-made design it has. Personally, it's one of my favorite childhood games back then that I've played for hundreds of hours before. The same thing when I had my first Armored Core game on the PlayStation 1. Mech games, along with my personal favorites, are one of the ones that I've enjoyed a lot back then. But I've been wondering, is the game really that good compared to how I remember it back then? This is K1PM, and today I'll be doing a full review of Armored Core 3 on the PlayStation 2, going more in depth on what the game is about and pointing out some of the details within the game.
System engaged.
Armored Core 3 was developed by From Software, the same ones who've made these titles that some of you might already know. And yes, even I'm surprised when I end up researching about it at first. From Software suddenly ends up abandoning the series, unfortunately, ever since their other games grew popular compared to the ones they currently have. Now, the game is somewhat of a reboot from the older series of Armored Core, but still follows the same setting as before, with just a few changes here and there. Having an apocalyptic futuristic scenario, most of human society went underground away from the aftermath of a global nuclear war. The remaining humans who survived that catastrophe above ground formed their own society called Layered, that's currently ruled over by an AI called the Controller, which dictates most of the things that happens within their world, whether it'll be the annihilation of threats like a growing rebellion, or certain factions that may pose as a problem. Within Layered Society, there's 3 other industry corporations that handles the land at the same time, planning for dominance over the other. Mirage, Crest Industry, and Kisaragi, which is a minor corporation compared to the other 2 I just mentioned. Ever since the Controller experienced frequent errors within its system, a rising rebellion formed a group called Union in order to overthrow the Controller. As the player that recently joins the ranks of a registered Raven, or mercenary within the Global Cortex organization, the player could choose different missions available for them, from defending or escorting missions, raiding other rival companies, investigating certain places, exterminating creatures, and etc. At the very least, the missions has a variety to it, either by means of accepting contracts with a huge sum of reward, or accepting most of the contracts from a certain corporation in order to get their trust. The higher the trust gained, the more available exclusive Armored Core parts to purchase, or even get as a gift. There's even a few secrets within the game when accepting additional contracts during a mission. More rewards and more hidden parts available to purchase, or can receive AC parts as a gift after completing it. Now, what I love about the game is its customization ability when building my very own mech, or known as Armored Core. Kinda like those Gundam units or orbital frames of Zone of Enders, but has a more building the mech kind of style. Out of all the mech games of its time, Armored Core series does the best job at it. Not even Mech Warriors has that of a high capability when building mechs back in the days. There's a huge amount of things that can be made when building your very own mech in the game. Not only the limbs and other noticeable parts can be changed, but as well as the interior parts of the AC or Armored Core unit, such as the boosters, FCS or the targeting system of an AC, generators for the energy supply, radiators for the cooling system, and even other inside parts that has different mechanics when used. As well as having an extra additional parts at the side of an AC's arm, and having different kinds of optional parts that could improve the AC's performance. And if you try to check the specs of an AC part, it has a ton of detail that would have to reconsider, making the game a bit kinda too complex for some people. But it has that level of depth that a lot of games doesn't have. The game would even go so far as to have an option of having an additional UI info within the screen in battle, to have a more detailed setup at least. Not only does a player have to reconsider the weight limit of the legs and the core, but also have to keep in mind the energy output and the cooling system of an AC. Having a cheap radiator would end up having problems within high level temperature missions, or to those enemies that can deal high temperature damage. As well as considering some of the missions can be a bit long, ammo supply would be one of the things that a player should watch out for, especially when ammo itself can be a bit pricey depending on the kind of weapon it is. Whether be carrying heavy weaponry like energy weapons, cannons, or rockets, or just bringing a simple lightweight setup for the mission. This what makes the game absolutely great for those who love building their very own mechs, not only by just for the looks, but how sometimes adapting within different missions is a must, what makes the game seem a bit refreshing from time to time. Not to mention, the level of depth when it comes to customizing your very own emblem for the armored core really is great. There's a ton of options and variety to choose along with its tools available. Even by means of coloring the mech has a huge improvement compared to the other games within the series. Aside from the whole customization of a player's AC unit, there's two things that a player can do within the game. Either doing several different missions offered by different other factions, or fighting off against different ravens within the arena. The missions can be alright, though most of it are rather a bit too short in my opinion. It has a set of challenging difficulty within each of the missions, but some of them can be a bit too dull. Kinda like how this boss fight weren't exactly that hard, despite the mission is close to the end. Unless I guess if you end up bringing the wrong leg part. But still, it's kinda a bit too short, or rather a bit anticlimactic to be honest. It became somewhat of a spray and pray kind of tactic. Not to mention, the level design within each mission are kinda a bit too repetitive at times. While some of the design within the stages are a bit dull. It would have been nice to have a bit more variety within stages, especially for a PlayStation 2 game at least. Although the mission briefing is actually fine. It has that dark corporate professional kind of feel to it every time, and fits really well within the game's theme. And bringing my very own MTs or Raven members to accompany me within missions makes the game a bit easier at times. But it's not like I could bring them within every missions, unfortunately. Although in some missions they end up getting stuck easily in stages. Still kinda makes it a bit pointless to have them a bit. But that doesn't always happen at the very least, which is a good thing. This one is a minor thing in the game, but some close combat equipments or weapons are rather hard to aim due to the game's hitbox problem. Now the arena section of the game is actually a decent one, having sets of different enemies to deal with in a selectable stage for the player to battle on. Although there are a few problems that comes with it. Some of the selectable stages within the arena are kinda too abusable. Some weapons would be rendered useless because of it, especially stages within tight places like at the parking lot. Just to be clear, I don't mind having different stages within arena mode, but it just seemed a bit too unfair for the enemy AI, since they can't exactly adjust to certain stages based on how the way they move. What's worse is how the AI behaves within those stages. It kinda seems like there's no AI pathing for them to navigate around. And this doesn't just happen within arena, it also happens during missions. And because of that, the AI tend to get easily stuck within walls or objects for long periods of time. It's a bit disappointing to see, especially since this problem existed way back then during PS1 times before. I didn't really expect that this would happen the same thing until now. Aside from that, the soundtrack fits really well within the game. It has that ominous or dark feeling filled with corrupted AI and shady corporations in the air. It could use a bit more variety to it, to be honest, but still the soundtrack overall is still good. Now, the art and design within the game looks alright for a PlayStation 2 game. The level of detail of each parts of the AC and the design with the UI is absolutely great. Not to mention how each of the Raven in the arena has their own custom design logo to differentiate each one of them really well. While some of them even has animated emblems that looks amazing. It's the same thing with other corporations and factions. I know that it's just a minor thing they added with the whole animated emblems, but it just looks really good. That's why I give this game a rating of 7.8 out of 10. It's without a doubt that Armored Core 3 has a tremendous amount of detail when it comes to the customization of mechs, that even until this day, it's really hard to replicate that kind of customizability it has, to the point that a lot of elements in the game that needs to be reconsidered. But the very awful AI and level design within missions would make the game a bit disappointing. Not to mention how short the missions can be, making the game a bit too repetitive. I personally love the series of Armored Core itself. I've been wanting to give it a higher score, but I still can't help with the problem it currently has. Although the game is still good. From Software really left the series out. As a fan of the series, it's rather a bit heartbreaking for us Armored Core fans. There's other games that's similar to the concept of it, but it's not the same thing on the level of depth when it comes to customization. So, what do you think about the video I've made? Be sure to leave a like and comment down below to help my growing channel out. And subscribe to stick around my channel for more game reviews such as these. I know it's a bit cliche of what I say, but it really helps me out morally, to be honest. This is K1PM, and I bid you farewell.